All right, if everyone could please take their seats. I welcome everyone to Special Standing Committee, the West Glanbrook Delegation evening for Monday, April 7th. We do have regrets this evening from Trustee Peddle, and I believe we have everyone else here. Just to remind trustees of the process, I'm sorry? Oh, we're missing student trustee Van Egnum. Thank you very much. So we have two regrets this evening. So just to remind trustees of the process for this evening. So first on our agenda, we will hear from delegations, and then we will also receive any correspondence that we've received on behalf of the ARC. And then from there, we do have our standing item, which is trustee ARC questions. And at that point, I'll remind us of that process as well. So we'll jump right into it, and we're looking at item number 2, our delegations. And with plenty of advertising and website advertisements and newspaper advertisements, we found our councillor who we'd like to welcome to the room. So at this point, I'd call Councillor Brenda Johnson. And thanks, Brenda. Just to remind you that you have registered, I believe, for a 5-minute delegation, although I don't think we're tight for time. And once again, welcome to the room, which you are very, very familiar with. So please proceed.
Thank you very much. This is really odd, to be honest with you. Careful, that's my seat. First of all, thank you very much for listening and for having me speak with you tonight. I know you have pretty hard decisions on your hands. And quite frankly, I don't envy you at all. I really don't. I actually sympathize greatly with your agenda in front of you, your mandate that's not of your own. It's something that's handed to you from the province. But I just wanted to give you some idea of what it's been like on this side. So just to give you an idea, I'm the councillor for Ward 11. It starts in Winona and ends in Mount Hope. It's the second largest ward in the city. It's the fastest growing ward, 78.6% in the last 4 years. I suspect in the next 4 to 5 years, I'll be the #1 in population in all of the city of Hamilton. So that should just give you an idea of the growth population, but also how important our schools are to us. When the ARC notices first came out for West Glanbrook, the first thing I did was I contacted the person, and please forgive me for not remembering the person's name, very nice lady, and said, is it okay if I come? And the response I got back, respectfully so, we would prefer not to have any political influence in the room. And I totally understood that and respected that. So I just wanted to put that out there. And to be honest with you, I probably would have said the same to you as well, but I don't know. I haven't been through this. So after many residents contacted me, they said that they were not getting any responses to their questions. Could I please help? So the last ARC meeting I attended, the one that was at Bellstone, and it was really interesting. There were only 2 parents there. Now, I know how you must feel. You've got a situation downtown where you've got a momentum that just seems to be larger than life, or you get complacency. And out in Mount Hope, you got complacency. So after the meeting was over, the Glanbrook Gazette, and I see Tamara Botting up there right now. You should be over here. This is where the media sits, by the way. And Tamara was there and wrote an article, and it basically said, where was everybody? And there was a letter in the editor the week later, and I have copies of it here. I will not read it verbatim because some of it's very derogatory. And it basically said, what's the sense? And that was really discerning. What do you mean, what's the sense? The Board of Education goes through all this time, all this money, trying to get the message out there, and they're not getting the message. And that was really bothersome to me. One of the things that was said during this ARC meeting, because the parents came up to me afterwards and said at the very beginning, they asked, why wasn't all 3 schools in Glanbrook reviewed? And this is not to suggest to close down one school over the other. But if you take a look at Glanbrook, you have on the very far west, you have the Mount Hope Village, that's your Mount Hope Elementary. On the far east, you have Belmore School that you just erected, which, by the way, I don't think I need to remind you that's overflowing. And then you have Bellstone tucked in the center. You have, what, 60, 65 children that are going to it. So it's completely underutilized. Why wasn't all 3 schools looked at to take a look at whether the students could be distributed? Or you can take a look at Mount Hope. My understanding during this ARC meeting that Mount Hope has some physical issues. So we're going to put more children in there, and I can tell you as the counselor of that area that it's still continuing to grow. It's not stopping. Just because the airport's there, all the growth was approved prior to the airport being the size it is. So it's going to continue to grow, and Mount Hope Elementary is going to have a lot of stresses. Now take a look at Bellstone. It's in the middle of the rural area. You can't develop it. We can't put water and sewer in there. So what is it going to be used for? My understanding is in the 1990s, you got a new gym put in there. You got some other good stuff put in there. So that's my request to you today. I understand you do not have an envious job. You've got some tough decisions to make. But I really wish that the entire community of Glanbrook was reviewed, and not just specifically just the west side. So it would have helped me a little bit better to stand in front of you and take bullets, but it's really hard for me to sympathize when I thought, yeah, we got two schools that are at capacity or near capacity, and we have one in the middle that's totally underutilized, and it's sitting in the middle of a ward that's growing faster than any ward in this city. So I really like, and I understand you have a process in place, and I respect that process. I'm just really asking you to step back a little bit, take a look at all three schools, and see whether or not there's a solution here that you can feel a little bit better about going forward. So those are my comments, and thank you very much for coming all the way down here for me. I just had to come over from my office, but I really appreciate you taking the time. And again, good luck with your decisions. They're not easy. I've said this to you in meetings. I think Mr. Hicks was there, and Trustee Bishop was there, and I said it there, and I'll say it again. I don't envy your position. It's not an easy one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. If you could just hang out there for just 1 second, just in terms of our process, after delegations, we do have the ability, according to our rules, to ask up to 5 minutes of any questions to the delegates. It's not 5 minutes per trustee, but a timed item, 5 minutes total. So just to remind trustees that moving forward, that is the process. So at this point, are there any questions from trustees to Councillor Johnson? Trustee Johnstone?
She spells her name wrong.
I just added that little bit more onto the end.
Yeah, that's right.
So I just wanted to make you aware that, just wanted to make you aware that the question that you've raised was actually raised during trustees' questions at our last meeting, and I believe it's being answered by staff tonight. Is that correct, in terms of why all three schools were not considered? Is that on tonight's?
Yes, it's on tonight's agenda, but just to remind trustees that there are questions for clarification from the delegate. So any clarification questions to the delegate directly. We can ask staff questions afterwards.
Sure, yep. I just wanted to make sure that Councillor Johnson and the audience were aware that that question actually will be answered later tonight if you want to stick around.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Johnson. Are there any other questions for the delegate? Being none, thank you very much for coming out, Councillor Johnson. I'm sure we'll see you for the rest of the process as well. Okay, so that is the end of our delegations. So just in terms of our rules, we do have the choice to either A, receive the delegation, or B, refer to staff. So I'm looking for a motion from trustees. All right, a trustee, Trustee Johnstone. Motion to receive. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Trustee Simmons. Any questions, comments? All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. So moving to item number 3, which is communication. We have one piece of communication that trustees will find in their package under 3A. We do not, in terms of process, read the communication. It's there for reference from trustees. If there's any questions or comments on that piece of correspondence, now is the time. And then similar to the delegations, we have the ability to receive or refer to staff. So at this time, are there any comments or questions or motions from trustees? Trustee Johnstone?
Motion to receive.
Motion to receive from Trustee Johnstone. Do we have a seconder? Trustee Hicks, any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving to our final item, Trustee ARC question. So this is a standing item on our agenda. Last week was our first shot at this. So just to remind trustees on the process and how we're going to proceed this evening, staff will begin by answering all of the pre-submitted questions. So that includes our verbal questions from last Monday, as well as any written questions that were submitted by last Wednesday. So staff will go through all of the questions and all of the answers. We kindly ask trustees to hold your questions until after each question has been answered, and what we'll do as trustees is work through ARC at a time with any questions for clarification or any new questions. So we'll turn it over to Dan for to answer all of the questions. So the floor is yours, Officer Del Bianco.
Thank you. Through the chair, we have 40 questions this evening that we put into a PowerPoint. Staff is available to address any follow-up questions. I'll point out just off the get-go some of the transportation-related questions. We've answered what we can this evening. There's still some additional work from transportation services that may be required to be done to flush out some of the second part of those questions. So with that said, we'll begin with the West Glanbrook ARC, and timely enough, why was Belmore not included in the terms of reference? There's three components to this answer. First and foremost, absolutely Binbrook. There is a lot of growth happening in Binbrook. The board actually has 2 elementary school sites, additional sites in Binbrook to accommodate combined 1,200 additional students. And our first one would be going in there in 2018. So the accommodation solution for Binbrook is a Binbrook accommodation solution identified in our EDC background study. The solution would include the construction of one new school at the very latest by 2018, and sooner if that land is available. So and the map a few slides down will also illustrate, help illustrate and define the answer to this question a bit more. Map is the next slide. So just to provide some context and perspective here, and I'll use my laser pointer. There we have Bellstone, smack dab in the middle, Mount Hope, and Belmore. So Belmore and the Binbrook community, lots of development happening there. We have 2 sites identified. And again, we were asked to identify the catchment areas, secondary catchment areas that the elementary schools feed into. So both Bellstone and Mount Hope feed into Ancaster, where Belmore is directed towards Saltfleet. So there's kind of a 2-part answer to that question. Staff believes that the accommodation solution for Belmore and the growth in Binbrook should be addressed through the new schools located in either one of those in that community. Again, this is a follow-up to that. So why did the ARC not include a boundary study? They actually did not include one. The second recommendation for the ARC was to actually redo the ARC and include Belmore in that accommodation review. So there was actually no boundary change recommended by either the ARC or staff. Where do students from Mount Hope currently feed into? And we've identified those. So the graduates of Mount Hope feed into Ancaster High for secondary, and the map 2 slides prior to that illustrates that. How can an addition of 1 bus not add additional transportation funds? And this was directly from that report. So no additional buses are actually required. The report identifies 1 additional run from the current complement of buses. So the additional run, so it's the number of buses don't change, but 1 bus would have to actually make multiple runs. And it's the additional run that we identify in the report. It's not actually an additional bus, and therefore there is no significant costs associated with that. Are there any well water or septic implications of the consolidation to the Mount Hope School? Mount Hope is connected to the city's system, and therefore no septic water or septic implications are going to impact this change. What is the feasibility of an express bus in order to reduce busing times? So the average bus ride time to Bellstone right now is approximately 38 minutes. The one figure that we always use is that every additional bus that we put in, whether it's an express bus or whatnot, is approximately $40,000 if we want to have a dedicated bus. And that's applicable to every single accommodation review if we're increasing busing costs. For the recommendation or the recommended Beverly Community Center partnership, with the city, can staff please commence our due diligence to find out if it's even a viable site? So since this came in last week, we are reaching out to city staff to determine the viability. So this is one of these questions that will have to come back. The 1 week turnover here wasn't enough to actually fully assess the viability of that site, but we're working towards that, and it'll come back in front of trustees. Again, a lot of transportation questions here. Here's another one that will require a bit more information from transportation services. It just takes a lot longer to do bus routes. So the buses are to remain at 24, and we're still in West Flamborough for the accommodation areas in question. How are the buses being distributed under the ARC and staff recommendations? What are the bus distances? And you can read the question there. So I'm going to read the response because it's long. I apologize for this one. Bus routes would be designated as part of the spring planning efforts immediately prior to any changes taking effect. So what that means is transportation services basically takes a snapshot in time of where students reside, where the new students are, who's left, and they do their routing in the spring. Estimates on service requirements for the purposes of ARCs were done at a very high level, as you can imagine, because they do change and because of the compressed time that we work within. We are looking at flushing out this answer more with them. We just need a bit more time. And again, these are one of these questions we'll be back in front of trustees with a bit more detailed information. Our transportation services received these questions last week and are working their way through rerouting. It's just a bit more of a complex problem that they need to work through. The ARC was specific that staff look into rural transportation through an equity and compassion lens, especially when consolidating schools with young children. So did staff look through this lens? Staff examined transportation as per our current policy and guidelines. So we're working within a time frame. Why does staff support a rural school of 525 students when it is out of the norm for all of our rural schools? What are the sizes and other rural schools included in the staff recommendation? So our long-term facilities master plan states that optimal elementary school sizes should range between 500 and 600. We understand that those are guiding principles, and if we could achieve those in rural communities, that's great. And if we can't, then it's something we strive for. In this particular, in the West Flamborough ARC, it was a goal that we could achieve, and therefore we adhere to the guiding principles in that accommodation review. Underneath that is a table of rural schools and the capacities of those schools, ranging anywhere from 181 up to 420. So West Flamborough, how many students by grade are currently coming down to school at Mill Grove Public School, residing north of Regional Road 97? To answer that question, there are 5 students at Balaclava and 38 at Mill Grove, and you can see the by grade breakdown there. The longest bus ride for Mill Grove is 45 minutes, and that's the information contained in our school information profiles that were distributed to the ARC. Yes. Good. The same question again. We're trying to find the routing and the amount of time and the costs associated with transporting students to the central community center site. That routing and those costings are underway right now, and again, that's a follow-up that we have to bring back to board. Are there well water and septic implications of the what are the well water and septic implications recommended as part of the consolidations? All of the septic systems in the area have reached the end of their life cycle. They are still functioning, but they are at the end of their life cycle. And regardless of whether we construct a new school or an addition, any work that we do to the site, we would endeavor to replace the septic systems. And the estimate is approximately, it could range up to $100,000 to replace a septic system in a school. In the long-term facilities master plan of 2013, Mill Grove Public School was not slotted to participate in an upcoming accommodation review. Why and how can staff now recommend the closure? So Mill Grove was not part of the original long-term facilities master plan schedule presented to the board in June. However, it was added on June 17th by a board motion. So the original recommendation by staff and the recommendation that was in the ARC schedule did not include Mill Grove. It was ratified at this table in June to include that school. The staff recommendation that we have right now is consistent with that put forward by the Accommodation Review Committee. What are the renewal needs at Millgrove? 1 to 5 years compared to Mount Hope. And again, we have all of the renewal needs at all of the schools broken up. And these are tables taken directly from the report. High and urgent needs, so those needs that we believe will be required at the schools within the first 5 years, as well as those that we believe are outside of year 5. So they could be 6, 10, or beyond. And that's broken down by school. Sure.
Perhaps this is a good time just to ask maybe the director to remind trustees and the public where they can find the answers to these questions after this evening.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this PowerPoint presentation will be on the website.
Perfect, thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
Does staff see Millgrove Public Schools having any value given its proximity to Waterdown, a high-growth area, as a spillover school for overcapacity schools, and an alternate to portables? There are currently in excess, when we look at Waterdown as an entire review area, elementary and secondary, of over 600 pupil places. There are 3 new schools identified in the Waterdown EDC background study, each of which would be over 600 pupil places. The timing of the new schools would correlate to development happening in Waterdown. So as the land becomes available, we purchase the land, the necessities there, the business case goes into the ministry, and we construct the new schools as they are required. So it has been identified as part of our education development charges background study. The land is 100% EDC eligible, so we can purchase it through education development charges when it is available, and that's usually the catalyst for business cases for new schools in that area. Again, just one more point on this because I think it's important to note that we, by we, planning staff, review enrollment projections on an annual basis. And reviewing enrollment projections also includes reviewing of development applications. So the timing of development, has it progressed, has it not progressed, which developments have progressed, and we adjust our timing of new school and capital priorities according to those annual updates to our enrollment projections. Can you tell me where and when the planned acquisition is in the East Waterdown Flamborough area? As I mentioned, the EDC identifies 3 schools. We can see in the east area, the 2 of them identified there. Both of which the proposed capacity as it sits today is 600. And while I say 600 today, we also understand, as we've gone through our secondary arcs, that those capacities will be reviewed as always prior to approving any construction to ensure that they address the accommodation needs in that community. So please provide a map of all of the Waterdown schools and their proximity to Millgrove. So here's Millgrove here, and the balance of the schools. So the question, the required capital projects without ministry funding chart has FTK and classroom additions listed as an expense, but does not show any FTK funding. Why is this? So in other accommodation reviews, you may see FTK funding as a funding source. In this particular review area, the schools have already been provided funding for FTK classrooms. So anything that we do above and beyond would be required out of our own pockets. What are the names and dates of other rural schools closed in the past? There we have them. The one that we're still tracking down because it's prior to amalgamation and the records get a bit more sketchy. So value to the student, value to the school board. Proximity to school, length of bus rides. If it is the only school within a community, how did staff decide to recommend the closure of previous schools? So what we try to do is our recommendations are really based on our guiding principles that were approved by this board last year. Those guiding principles in the facilities master plan are just that. They're used as a guide. Whenever we could achieve them and we work towards striving to achieve them, that's how we design our plans. And they include enhancing quality in teaching learning environments, increasing utilization rates, aligning with the program strategy, ensuring school size, organization, and the site size is taken into account, transportation and accessibility concerns, flexibility in the learning environments, and again, neighborhood and community access. So whenever we discuss any schools in the board, the guiding principles are our driving force from a planning perspective, coming up with an accommodation solution. They're in East Hamilton now. On going. Why were there no parent representatives from Hillcrest on the ARC membership? No volunteers actually came forward, so we requested them, and it's all done via letter, but no volunteers came forward. WH Ballard has an OTG of 840 students. What is the history and size of the school? So this was a bit of a learning experience for me as well. Originally, it was built as a high school that accommodated over 1,000 students. Please provide a map including AM Cunningham and Queen Mary schools. And there we have them, Cunningham, Mary. So you can see where they relate to the rest of the schools in the East Hamilton accommodation review. This map trustees would have seen last week because it also includes the student numbers for the specific areas of those two boundaries. The busing estimates are not consistent. Please verify which is more correct. So actually, the total cost for the option is $231,000. The $192,000 represents the difference between that cost and status quo. So they're actually two different numbers. The 231 is the total cost of the option, and we've always tried to keep a running total on the side that suggests, well, what is the new option relative to status quo? So under this scenario, the board would pick up an additional $192,000 in transportation under the different scenarios. How did the ARC react? And this is a bit of a challenging question. How did the ARC react to K-3 schools merging with K-8 schools? Now, I can't speak on behalf of the ARC, but what I can do is draw from their report. The ARC recommendation in East Hamilton number 1 includes closing all schools and moving towards JK-8 facilities. So on one hand, there seems to be the JK-8 model, but under the second recommendation, it was to retain 2 K-5 facilities. So they have two different viewpoints depending on the option served in front of them. And yes, the grade 8 students would feed into the same secondary school or secondary schools. What approach or lens did staff use when choosing the school boundaries for the option requested by Trustee White last week? There's 4 points that we took a look at when reviewing the option or the scenario that we developed for Trustee White. One was to retain the alignments between the historical alignments between junior and senior associated schools. We honored the boundary changes as discussed by the Accommodation Review Committee. So when they said this community works well with this community, we respected those conversations and those discussions that we had there. We tried to maximize walking distance. We ensured K-8 facilities. So we tried to adhere to our guiding principles as much as possible. And we tried to keep neighborhood streets together. So for example, we want to split a townhouse complex up. So if the entire complex fell within one catchment area, we wanted to make sure that the whole complex went in one direction. So there were 4 fundamental principles there. Can staff please clarify the ARC report meeting minutes where the ARC's 2 recommendations are ranked? They actually aren't ranked. Here is the excerpt from the minutes. You can see the discussion that took place and then the vote at the bottom. Was some dialogue about that happened. So the scenarios, these are additional scenarios that were requested of us, and they're on the following slides. So it's not only the closure of Woodward and Rocks Park, The other schools would remain open, but there were also boundaries attached to these two scenarios. So if I can go through them, the enrollment projections for scenario 1, and I'm going to jump back and forth for a second between the map and the numbers. So scenario 1, those were the lines that were provided to us and asked us to explore. And again, we tried our best to adhere to the K-8 model, closure of Rocks Park and Woodward, and the corresponding enrollments by school. And there's the boundary map. So it's the same scenario, except a different set of boundaries that were provided to us and asked to explore. So I'll go to the boundaries first. And I think the biggest difference is right in there. Again, we've adhered to our guiding principles in K-8 facilities. And you can see the corresponding impact on enrollments and overall utilization. The boundary again. We're at Central Mountain now, the home stretch. Is the staff recommendation the same as any of the 35 options that the ARC created? None of the 35 options that the ARC created or explored had the combination of closing Cardinal Heights, Eastmount Park, and Linden Park. Again, one of the more challenging questions for me to answer, but I can just pull out from the report what I was able to. How did the ARC react to K-6 schools merging with K-8 schools? And 2 points, and these are directly from the reports. The ARC recommendation number 1 changed the grade configuration at 3 of the existing schools. And the second ARC recommendation does not change any of the grade configurations. The impact on secondary schools is in the paragraph at the bottom. The final 2 questions, I believe. How many schools will be coming out, and this is a generic all accommodation review type questions. How many schools will be coming out of the staff proposals with a K-8 program with less than 600 students? And there you have it. The 11 schools there. The grade structure, proposed capacity, and enrollment. So if looking at boundaries, will staff take into account socioeconomic factors? We take a look at a number of factors. We take a look at enrollments in certain areas, natural boundaries like geographic boundaries, whether it's a road. We look at proximity to other schools. We look at associated school clusters. And we look at socioeconomic factors are taken into consideration wherever possible. So the challenge we have with an elementary school is that the boundaries are so small sometimes. With secondary, we have large tracts of land and large tracts of the city where you can clearly investigate that. It is a bit more challenging when dealing on a more micro level. However, when possible and given the opportunity, the socioeconomic factors are definitely something that we take into consideration. With that said, that concludes the first round of 40 questions.
Thank you very much, Officer Del Bianco. This is the time now where trustees can ask questions for clarifications on the responses we just heard. So before we ask any new questions, do any trustees have questions on responses that Dan has just presented? Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you, and through the chair. I'm just wondering if Mr. Del Bianco can clarify why we would not consider Bellstone as a facility in the interim to accommodate Glanbrook students before 2018 and before the two new schools. That's
Okay.
question number one. I do have a second question as well.
Sure. So is that a question for clarification that was asked this evening, or is that a new question?
That's building off of the earlier question about why we did not consider Glanbrook in the initial review. I know there's been many conversations. I'm just trying to get at more detail for the public, because I know that there's been many conversations.
Okay, so the question is why was Bellstone not recommended as a holding school in the interim? Okay.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start, and if planning staff wants to weigh in. There's a couple of points, those ones that we identified, but if we explore them in a bit more detail, there's two things that come to our realization. The size of the school is small, so to accommodate any more students, you're really not doing much when you consider that the school is approximately, I believe it's 180. The capacity, there's about 60 students in there, so you're really dealing with 120 spots. Growth expected for the Glanbrook area far exceeds that. The second component of that, and I touched on it earlier, was the new schools that we believe are the accommodation solution for Glanbrook. We would, while EDCs cover the land acquisitions, we would have to put a business case towards the Ministry of Education for the construction of a new school. One of the things is, as we've learned the last couple of years, is you have to make a very strong business case to the Ministry of Education. That business case needs to demonstrate clearly what the current situation is and identify clearly why you require a new school. So if we start dispersing students amongst multiple communities, what I believe that we will do is end up delaying our ability to qualify for a brand new school in Glanbrook. So once the land is available, we will purchase, followed by a business case to the ministry, a very strong business case to the ministry. So there's two components to that answer that I may not have flushed out in its totality the first round, but I hope I've done it this time.
Thank you. Trustee Johnstone, your second question?
Thank you. My second question has to do with the Flamborough ARC, and just in specific to the question about Millgrove and Rockton, and what did staff consider in choosing to choose Millgrove to close the school over Rockton. I know that trustees are aware of the terms of reference, so I was hoping to get a little more detail on that response in terms of what considerations went into suggesting a Millgrove be closed over Rockton.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I apologize. Once again, the Accommodation Review Committee came up with the solution. There's also the recommendation to construct 2 new schools as part of that solution. Back to the business cases that we've just discussed. In order to make strong business cases to the ministry, we have to take everything into consideration. And the strength of that business case to construct 2 new schools is based on the closure of the remaining schools.
Thank you. Trustee Bishop?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was about the number of schools that were less than 600. You'll remember, Mr. Chairman, that one of the reasons that we're looking at this with such care is that we have enormous inequity presently within our elementary schools, as indeed we had within our secondary schools. We have schools that are small, we have schools that are large, we have schools that have lots of facilities and schools that do not. And the large schools, particularly if there are more than 3 grades in 6, 7, and 8, are able to offer music, art, and some specialized programming and a phys ed teacher to those students. I see from the chart, which I wasn't, that there are at least 3 schools, Queensdale at 279, Ridgemount being recommended for 382, and the new school in the Flamborough area for 350 students. These are new K-8 configurations, 2 in existing schools and 1 in a new planned school that would be very small for a K-8 school. Not only would they be small, but they would also presumably have split grades, more split grades than other schools, and not at 350 279 at Queensdale be able to offer the same thing that a school of 600 students is going for. So I'm wondering have we abandoned our rationale for schools of 600? I'm wondering if I could have some comments. My concern is from a program point of view and our ability to offer the same sort of programming to students wherever they are across the district.
Mr. Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll begin and then Daniel can assist. One of the things about the guiding principles that the board has approved is that they all will not be operative in every scenario, and that we do our best, as Dan has said, to operate with as many of them as possible. And in the particular case of the Central Mountain, if you'll recall, the community made it very clear that in their scenarios, they were not asking for new schools. They actually asked for different scenarios. And so we moved towards a accommodation strategy, because as you'll recall from the percentages, there's quite a large number of those schools that now will move to 90 or above percentage. So we do understand that different communities are, through the process, asking for different things. Staff's job in response is to look at the guiding principles that we have set forward. We are learning how to provide some of the programs that Trustee Bishop just spoke to in other ways, and that's obviously still very new for our board, i.e. sending music teachers to different schools and the like. So the answer is we have not abandoned the guiding principles. We cannot use all the guiding principles in each scenario, and we've put forward to you what we thought we heard the community say, and that's what you see. But again, the board may make different choices around that.
Thank you. Trustee Bishop?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I have enormous difficulty with that because I've had schools where there are enormous differences in the programs offered to students because of the size of the school and particularly the size of the number of students in grades 6, 7 and 8. It's not just, Mr. Chairman, the specialised programming.
Trustee Bishop, and certainly I'll let you continue.
What I'm saying is that I'm personally
we're looking for questions.
I'm commenting about my concern about the size of schools that we're suggesting, that we're actually suggesting that it's perfectly proper to have a school of 279 at Queensdale. That's all.
Yep, and we will have plenty of opportunity for argumentation, but we do appreciate the question. Further questions for clarification? I have Trustee Orbit on the list, followed by Trustee Brennan. Trustee Orbit?
Sorry.
You heard my colleague's comments. The question for clarification I would like to ask. Initially, through the staff came up with a recommendation. Part the director didn't make. Just state that these schools work very, very hard to look at all possibilities. So I'm going to go back through the chair to once again very clearly why the staff decision visited their first recommendation at that point in time and for 8 schools to consider. I'd like to have that clarified because in my area, small mountain problems with accommodation.
Sure. Trustee Orban, so I believe the question is, what is the rationale for the final recommendation compared to the initial recommendation? Thank you, Trustee Orban.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may start by saying that, and I think it's important for me to state that the staff's recommendation using certain rationale may or may not match the communities based upon the rationale they used and may not match what rationale or lenses this board wishes to use. And our voice need not have any more influence than the voice of the communities, which may be different. I just wanted to state that. As you can see from these recommendations, staff has a very strong rationale around a K-8 school. And the reason for that rationale is based on some research which speaks to minimizing transitions. That is something that you will see throughout, and so that was the starting point. And so in the Central Mountain recommendations from staff, you see that first and foremost. You also see us responding to some of the concerns in that particular community regarding their definition of where community lines are, and that's the reason that the recommendation as you see it.
Thank you. No further questions, so we'll go to Trustee Brennan.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation of answers to the submitted questions. Really appreciated the. I see that some other work needs to back to us on transportation. And I want to ask one question. City, Montreal. I guess I want to get a handle on the septic tank issue out in West Flamborough. And just have a sense of, with the renovated school or the replacements, renovated schools, and moving forward with any new school, would we be ultimately eliminating septic tanks as issues there, or will that be site specific? I just want to have a better sense of what our guiding principle, if you will, is on septic tanks. Thank you.
Officer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our septic tank guiding principle is if servicing is available, then we will no longer be on septic. If servicing is not available, we would be required to replace septic with septic.
Thank you. Trustee Hicks.
This line about the boundaries for McNabb.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the white area here, the Sherwood catchment area, the McNabb catchment area, that's the proposed new South School, Nora Francis catchment area. This down here is all Lancaster, and there we have Saltfleet.
My understanding, though, there was a small area boundary. They have their choices that we
Yes.
identified. Is that going to last more than 3 years?
Officer? Director, who are we looking to? To Executive Superintendent Reinhold?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that section at the top where the students have the choice, that choice is for the students who are currently at Hill Park or Barton and want to choose which school they would go to.
Right.
Their siblings are also allowed to follow through where they went, but once they are finished, any students who are coming in now from grade 8 would go to their regular schools unless they are a sibling. Once all of those kids, the current kids and any siblings have gone through that school, then that's finished and they would be going to their home schools. We anticipate that's about 3 to 4 years.
I thought it was for 3 years when we had tried that, and it came back to the trustees that it was the siblings would for 3 years, but it's until we filter through the whole system for siblings. So it could be 4 years. And that was
The minimum would be 4 years, Trustee Hicks, because they have the students who are in grade 8 and going to grade 9 now.
Right.
If there is a sibling going in there, then those students would be able to graduate from the school that they're attending. But then if those kids are grade 8 and don't have a sibling, they're directed to their home schools.
And the sibling rule
Yes.
some
Superintendent?
calls. Thank
Yes,
you.
it has been, and we've sent that communication out to the families.
Thank you.
Trustee Turkstra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Talk about the guiding principles. I feel like we were very specific last year about how our small and rural schools did not fit into this mold. And my question of clarification is, are we actually going to try to fit all of these guiding principles, all of our schools, knowing that the trustees around this table supported the long-term facilities master plan guiding principles, knowing that that they're not going to fit into this mold? So either for me, it's amending the long-term facilities master plan guiding principles, or is there flexibility guiding principles on recommendations that staff is going to make?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as I answered to Trustee Bishop's question, the guiding principles are flexible. We don't believe that we can use all of them in every circumstance. And what our job is to put forward a recommendation to start the process, listen very closely to what ensues, and then, where possible, respond with a recommendation that tries to bring into account most of the guiding principles. And in the case of Flamborough, clearly the committee said to us that they had a preference. And we looked at that preference and felt that we could put in front of this board the same preference. There was also a second piece to that, and again, as I stated earlier, there may be perspectives that this board needs to debate that are different than both of them, which is in your purview. But our rationale is to use as many as possible, to listen closely to the committee, and then to put what we can in front of you that makes the best sense after that.
Thank you. Trustee Turkstra?
So my next question is about bus rides for the students north of Regional Road 7 on the West Flamborough Arc. And you had pulled off of the profiles that it was 45 minutes. I would like to refer that back to you to please qualify that number from the SIP, because I know that it's not true. 45 minutes. Whether that's on a SIP document or not, I just know it not to be true. Also, that's to Millgrove. So what does that number look like if they now have to go to Spencer, which is the question.
Okay, so we'll take that question for clarification and respond next week, or do we have the answer right now?
We'll take them away.
Okay, we'll take that away. Thank you, Trustee Turkstra. Any further questions for clarification?
Yes, please. So can you provide the details of the excess 600 pupil places in Waterdown in those schools? Where are those excess pupil places? Question.
Officer Del Bianco, or Mr. Director, do we have those statistics?
I do. I just had them
Yes, we do.
written down. It's just sitting on my desk.
Carl? Do you have any non-questions for Dan?
In preparation for that question, I had them written down.
Thank you.
Alan Greenleaf, it's over capacity. Balaclava's under capacity by 29. Let's get all my schools here. We have Waterdown District High School, which is under capacity.
Is that actually included in the number then, through you, Mr. Chair?
Yes. Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, included in the surplus spaces in the Waterdown review area is the surplus space at Waterdown District High School.
My question of clarifications for that would be, what is the number without the secondaries?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the officer will answer that, but I just want to clarify, though, that the reason why it's included there is because ministry staff expects us to include it when we're dealing with a circumstance where an area has surplus space for a considerable amount of time, and our planning statistics would suggest that this number will exist for a considerable amount of time. Through you, Mr. Chair, with the specifics to the elementary numbers.
There's approximately 150 surplus pupil places in that area at the elementary panel.
Thank you. Trustee Turkster?
Okay. The other question I had is just a clarification that full-day kindergarten is no longer funded now that we've finished the 5-year implementation. So if we have to do a renovation at a school, which we will have to do, should we choose certain options, then we have to self-fund those.
Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the officer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have received funding for full-day kindergarten, and we have funding held over for full-day kindergarten projects that we have not yet undertaken. So some of those schools that are still going through ARCs, or we knew they were coming into an ARC, we didn't invest full-day kindergarten funds, and they're in their 5th year. These schools were early on in the process. Funding was already used, allocated to them from our full-day kindergarten funding, so therefore they, in the ministry's eyes, we've done our full-day kindergarten work at those schools, and now we have to go back, and any changes we would be required to do out of our own budget.
So to clarify, we are going to close schools that funding for full-day kindergarten our own expense.
Clarification, officer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's the challenge of the way the ministry has rolled out FDK funding, in that asking us to identify early on where the schools would be, and this was done prior to any long-term facilities master plan or accommodation review schedule. So those that we knew that were coming up to an ARC, we did to the best of our ability, we were able to reduce scope or change scope to ensure that we weren't investing in brand new spaces. It may have been a retrofit or working within the space we had. So we've done our best to manage, given the circumstances and conditions that we had to work within.
Thank you. Trustee Turkster?
Just the last one. For the Central Mountain, I guess I'll have to be more specific in my question. So I asked if the staff recommendation was the same as any of the 35 options put forward. Are there any staff recommendations that were similar then?
Through you, Mr. Chair, because of the lens of JK to 8, it made our recommendations very different. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the officer, were there any of the 35 that were even remotely close?
Officer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to have to explore that in a bit more detail. With 35 options, they don't ring off the top of my head, but we will definitely come back with that, the closest.
Thank you. Trustee Glauser?
Yes, excuse me, through you, Mr. Chair. Just on a little bit lighter note, having been rural most of our lives, I can tell you that the septic systems that were put in those schools years ago are much different than the septic systems now that are available, much more high tech. We're just going through a fairly large renovation at the Ancaster Senior Achievement Center, which included having to have the city put in a new septic system, which they very graciously did. So I know the systems are much better, so I think we don't need to worry as much about.
Thank you. As a question, we agree. Yes, see, there we go. We turned it into a question. Thank you, Trustee Glauser. We have some second-time speakers. So we have on the list Trustee Orban, Trustee Bishop, and Trustee Johnstone. So we'll begin with Trustee Orban.
My question is around my understanding through some research of my own, there are actually engineers from septic tanks, from gasoline stations, et cetera. And I would feel a little bit concerned about sites that we won't be using, and there's a septic system in there. Food in terms of leakage because of environmental factors. And my research really shows soil, the ground are very. So
So-
as much as
Question?
yeah, well,
Question for clarification?
well, that's my question. Are we going to look at those septic tanks, environmental concerns?
Thank you.
Through you,
Officer?
Mr. Chair, we review the state of our septic systems on an annual basis to ensure that their capacity, how much is in there, the backflow, is it flowing properly? There's a lot that we take a look at on an annual basis to ensure that we're being environmentally sensitive.
Thank you. Trustee Bishop. Oh, I'm sorry. Trustee Orban. Officer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, should the board choose to sell a site, once the site is no longer in our possession, then it's the new owner's responsibility to maintain the septic bed or review the septic bed or monitor.
That's correct, Officer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, while any site is within our ownership, we would continue to maintain, review the septic bed. That's correct.
Thank you. Trustee Bishop.
Mr. Chairman, I'm now moving on to new questions. Are
Actually,
you
yeah,
at that stage?
we will be in one moment. So we have Trustee Johnstone with a question for clarification, then we'll put you first on the list for new questions. Trustee Johnstone.
Sorry, I also thought we had moved on to new questions,
So Trustee Johnstone, you are second on the list. So any further questions for clarification? Seeing none. So at this point, we'll ask new questions. If we can do one arc at a time, just to keep our questions clear focused, because someone else may have your exact same question. So we'll just begin in order of our delegation nights. So slowly. We are recording through Joey, so we may have to review the minutes. But nonetheless, first, any questions, any new questions on West Glanbrook? Trustee Johnstone.
to the chair, I'm wondering if we can go back to the slide with the catchment area for West Glanbrook. Map.
Secondary catchment?
Yes. My question for staff is, why are we not considering doing a boundary review and redirecting Mount Hope students to the new Henderson School?
Thank you. So we'll take that away for next week. Further questions? Sorry, just to clarify, make sure staff got the question. Your director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're just needing a little bit of help. We're fine to bring back that information, but that is outside of the ARC discussion. We just wanted to let you know that, so it's up to the board's desire if we are needing to do that at this time.
Just some clarity. Can we just hear the question briefly one more time?
Why are we not considering doing a boundary review and sending students to the new Henderson School? It's closer.
Okay, so we'll leave that with staff, and staff will answer to the best of their ability. I mean, all questions are indeed fair, but staff will answer to the best of their ability. Thank you. Further questions on West Glanbrook? We had Trustee Brennan and then Trustee Turkster.
I just, this may be another new question that I'm going to be asking elsewhere in a question section tonight. But if Belmore was not included in the ARC, and we're thinking that there will be new schools out in that community at some, what is the process for making those decisions in the future? Is that another ARC, even though there wouldn't be, one current school, and they would be thinking about new schools? I'm not sure I understand what the process is for re-engaging that thinking as we move forward in that community. So that's a process question.
Thank you. New questions. We have, I believe, Trustee Turkstra.
I don't know if, I have questions that apply to all the ARCs.
I do.
At the end?
Yeah, we'll save those for the end.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, any further questions on West Glanbrook? Okay, moving to West Flamborough. New questions for West Flamborough. Trustee Turkstra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first question I have is ARC report for option utilizations on and which are all of the tables. They do not currently represent the current on-the-ground capacities up to 2016. They have the after consolidation percentage utilizations, but the before consolidation utilization, particularly for Spencer Valley, is incorrect. So I think that should be reissued. There are some mistakes. Arts.
Thank you. So we captured that. Questions?
That was in the ARC report, not the director's report.
Okay. Thank you.
The second question I have is the final school information profile that's listed on the website, the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board website, is not under where it should be, under profiles. It's the draft. And the final copy that was modified by the ARCs is actually embedded in the minutes of the 600 pages. So it needs to be moved.
Thank you. Next question.
The third question I have is, can trustees have a copy of the Mill Grove Public School Boundary Review? The survey results, which were in. The next one, I have two more, and that's it for. 26. Not 26 tonight. The first one is under the staff and ARC recommendations to close Spencer Valley, Greensville, and public schools. What's going to happen to the secondary school boundaries for each of these attachments? Should they be consolidated? Currently, Spencer Valley, Greensville students are aligned to the Dundas Valley Secondary School. Spencer Valley, Mill Grove catchment students are aligned with Waterdown District High School. That's a new
Future high school boundary.
because we have those boundaries are actually by board motion.
Clarity on process.
Okay. And the last one I have is on page 9-15, which is 10 of the ARC report. The total combined utilizations are calculated for the options that are being recommended, which is tables 5. And in the director's report on page 9-38, which is 9, the revised staff recommendation provides the combined utilization rate, but it does not show the combined utilization rates for option 2B. Director's staff recommendation. So my question is, to please provide the combined utilization rate, and would it not be useful for trustees to have these charts combined utilization charts presented together in one report instead of us having to disseminate them separately in two reports.
So we can grab that information. I mean, the reports are already finalized, but we can bring the requested information to light through staff.
Well, in order to get it, we had to look at separate reports, and that doesn't serve anybody.
Have that?
Thanks.
Sorry, just to make sure Dan and Director are clear. We're clear? Work with that? Perfect. And final? Oh, no, that was the final. Oh, jeez. Thanks to Trustee Turkstra. Any further questions on West Flamborough? Being none, next is East Hamilton. New questions for East Hamilton. Trustee Bishop.
I believe, Mr. Chairman, that in East Hamilton, I'm sorry, because this is really a general question. I know that on the the East Mountain, we also are doing this, that we are moving some schools that were K to 6 to K to 8. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman? Just as a general statement, in East and East Hamilton as well as the East Mountain.
I think we can answer that right now.
Through you, Mr. Chair, all of the ARCs under the staff recommendations move to the JK to 8 model.
So Mr. Chairman, the last round of elementary ARCs in West Hamilton, the question of renovating K to a school that was grade 1 to 6 into a K to 8 school, in the actual ARC procedures, it was mentioned how there were not been good experiences of doing this because of you have to add labs, you have to add for K to 8 schools, you have to have proper gym sizes and this kind of thing. So was our experience in renovating schools to become JK to 8 from grades 1 to 6, had our experiences been, first of all, taken into account in these recommendations?
Okay, so staff has captured that in terms of renovations to K to 5, to K to 6, turning to K to 8s.
So I'm back again about programming, and this is a sort of it's an East Hamilton and it's an East Mountain question.
So it does relate slightly
Yes.
to more than one ARC.
Yes.
Okay. Further.
No, that's my next question coming up. It's both of them relate to both those two areas.
Okay. Well, if it only is the two, you can ask a question now if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This continues to be. I'm really concerned that we're not, because our changes and the work we're going to be doing is going to have a long impact on students when we create schooling. Unless I'm really concerned that we do not end up with solutions which mean that some students do better than others. I'm really concerned about this. Mr. Chairman, so I'm going on again about the size of the school. We have, there was a pan-Canadian study on the teaching of mathematics that saw that there was a link between success in mathematics in elementary school and the size of the school. It so happens that in Quebec, most schools are 800 students, and Quebec has been looking very good indeed in terms of math. And so what is one of the factors that mean there's a relationship between the size of a school and the teaching of mathematics? Well, Mr. Chairman, we have most of our teachers have degrees in sociology or kinesiology. Very few have a math or science background.
So the new question of staff is any insight into an experience from our board in relation to size of the school related to mathematics?
Well, that might be one question. That might be one question.
So we've captured one question, whether staff has anything to offer.
Size of school. I would also like to know about size of school in terms of the extracurricular activities that can be offered when you have a larger school. You can put on more things when you have a larger school.
Question one is referring to size of school in mathematics. The second one is size of school in extracurriculars.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions on East Hamilton? Yeah, that's right. Trustee Brennan, I forgot about you. You're even difficult to see when you're sitting beside me.
I'm standing, by the way. Thank you. This is related more to a general question that I'm going to ask when we get to general questions, but I wanted to know when was the last time, I'm not sure if it would have been called an accommodation review committee process then or not, but when was the last time that these schools in East Hamilton would have been through a review?
Thank you. That's a good question. Thank you. Further questions on East Hamilton? Seeing none, going to the final arc before we open up to general questions, and that are questions pertaining to Central Mountain. Central Mountain, new questions. Seeing none, we'll move to general questions. So any questions that may pertain to any ARC or ARC process. Questions, general questions. Trustee Brennan.
I'm standing again. This may be more of a question to you, Mr. Chair, as Chair of Policy, but I just want to be reminded about our policy regarding accommodation review cycle. So, for instance, if you have a group of schools that are part of an ARC, then decisions are made and a decision is not made to close them, let's say that's the worst case. Then when would that particular school be subject to another accommodation process according to our policy? I'm just not remembering our new one versus our old one.
And we can get that, we can ask staff to prepare that for next week. I mean, our policy is silent on that, but the ministry does have an unbinding suggestion. But we'll capture the exact wording from the guidelines and present that next week. Further general questions. Trustee Hicks.
Through the chair, the comment was made earlier tonight by a presenter that my question would be, what is the policy when calls come in from councillors? It was my understanding that invite them and they are part of the ARC non-voting. So I would like clarification on that comment that was made directly, because relationship with the councillors and the trustees, we're trying to put it on a better foot. And so that comment tonight really bothered me. Thank you.
Mr. Director, do you have a response right now?
Through you, Mr. Chair, because I think this is important. We don't normally answer the question the same night, but when I heard the presenter, I actually texted my whole team immediately and said, please give me some insight into this. We really would need to find out who may have suggested that, because none of us who are responsible for this know who that would be, because it's against what we stand for and what our board directs. So we will follow up if we can on why that happened. Yep. Because we don't know why it happened.
Yep. And then thanks for the clarity. And in terms of our policy, city councilors are not mentioned in the revised current policy, but everyone is encouraged to participate. So we'll provide any clarification or follow-up on behalf of staff. Trustee Hicks? Thank you. And then that's perhaps a good segue before I go to Trustee. Oh, Trustee Simmons could not quite hear that, but to summarize, everything is great and wonderful. No, the clarification will go out and we'll make sure that the communication reaches everyone in terms of our process. So, which is a good segue in saying that at this point of the process, even though, for instance, the West Glanbrook delegations have been completed this evening, that doesn't mean that we're not accepting any type of correspondence from West Glanbrook, concerned community members, parents, students, etc. So we will be receiving correspondence right up until decision nights, as well as we are available to be contacted on an individual basis. So we're not discouraging any type of comments whatsoever, and in fact we encourage everyone to be part of the process moving forward, whether the delegation evening has happened or not. Trustee Simmons, did you have a question, or just that was your question? Okay, perfect. General questions. Trustee Terkstra.
Thank you. So I have 3 questions for ARCs. So of the 22 year 5 schools how many by school name are in current ARCs? And how did being in the last year of implementation affect enrollment? Found those schools had already fully implemented garden. Did enrollment suffer because of this? Projections account for this.
Thank you.
The second one I have is, do any of the schools in the ARCs have specialty programs that will have to be moved, ARC or the staff recommendations? What are these programs? How easily can they be moved? And what are the challenges, add opportunities?
Thank you. Third question.
And the last one I have is, I couldn't find it in my binder. Lift my binder. Can trustees please have a copy of the letter sent out to potential partners? Given that this letter did not produce any facility partner in any ARC, is the director evaluating the content of the letter, how the letter was sent out, who it was sent to, and if there was any follow-up made by staff?
Perfect. So just clarification on that as staff is typing. Which letter are we referencing?
So in each of the ARCs, there's a section about facility partnerships. And in every single ARC that we're looking at right now, it said that no appropriate responses were received. So I want a copy of that letter. What was sent out? How did they send it out? Sent out just to city partners? Are there provincial partners? What does that look like? Because we did not get any. Which is 4 ARCs. It seems a bit odd.
Thank you. Further general questions? Seeing none, moving to our agenda, that takes us to adjournment. So just to remind folks that this wraps up our West Glanbrook delegation evening. We do have 3 further ones planned, and they've been widely published. And just to reiterate that everyone is welcome to register up until noon the day of, and we're happy to hear from everyone and anyone, and any further correspondence on any of the ARCs can be received at any time. So if there's any difficulty in getting communication across, please contact us, and we will ensure that everyone's voice is heard. We're looking for a motion to adjourn. Trustee Brennan, seconded by Trustee Hicks. All in favor? Thank you. Have a great evening.